All right, guys. So today you should have already finished your geology doodle notes and your soil doodle notes. So the next thing we're going to look at and learn how to use is called the soil texture triangle. And this is something that the USDA uses, different places use to identify different types of soil. Next week, we will do a little lab that tests where we put our soil from different sample places into a jar, and then we calculate the percentage of sand, silt, and clay in the soil. Once we have those percentages, this is the tool that we use to identify what texture or what type of soil it is. So I'm going to go over how to read this soil texture triangle. And so to do that, I'm going to move over to Word. So as you can see, the texture triangle has the percent clay down one side, percent silt down the other, and percent sand across the bottom. Now inside the triangle, you have different classifications or types of soil. So up here in this bolded area, you have clay. Over here in this smaller triangle, you have silty clay. This small triangle, you have sandy clay. Right here, you have clay loam. Your bolded lines are what separate your types of soil. So to read this, you're going to draw different lines on the chart, or you can do it visually. It's probably better if you have a way to print out this texture triangle and draw on it, because you can get confused easily if you're not drawing on it. But if we look at the worksheet that I posted, the first problem I've already given you the answer to, but I want to show you how to find that answer yourself. So for A, it tells us that there is 30% clay, 10% sand, and 60% silt. So to read that on our soil texture triangle, the first thing it told us was that there's 30% clay. So if I come over here to the percent clay area, I have arrows on this soil texture triangle to help you know which direction to draw your lines. So for the percent clay, it said 30. So if we go over here along the side, we find 30%. So I would draw a line along this one to represent 30% clay. Now the next thing they told us was that we had 10% sand. So be careful not to get confused on which side of the triangle you're working from, because right now we're looking at percent sand. It told us that we had 10% sand. So we look across the bottom, we find 10%. Look at your arrows and which direction you're going to draw, because you could get confused and easily go this way, and then you're all wrong. The arrow tells us we need to go this way for 10% sand. So I keep drawing my line. And then finally, the last thing they told us was we had 60% silt. So remember, find the correct side of the triangle. Percent silt is over here. Look at your arrow for the direction that you need to draw and find 60%, which is right here, and draw your line down to represent 60% silt. Now, once we have our three lines drawn, we need to look at where those lines all intersect. And remember, I told you about these bolded squares. So our lines intersect right here. So that means that this soil sample falls into the box or the category of silt clay loam. So if we go back to our worksheet up here, that is correct. The soil texture name for 30% clay, 10% sand, 60% silt is silt clay loam. So now let's look at the next one. It tells us that we have 60% clay, 30% sand, and 10% silt. So we need to find the texture name for this soil. So if we go back to the chart where I can draw, so we said we have 60% clay. So remember to find the correct side of the triangle, 60%, and look at which direction we need to draw our line. So I'm finding 60%. My arrow says to go straight across. Maybe I should not use a highlighter on this. Okay. So percent clay, 60%, arrow says go straight across. Then it told us that we had 30% sand. So silt is over here, sand is at the bottom. So we need 30% sand. Our arrow says we are going to go diagonally up towards the left. So when I find 30% sand, I'm going to follow my line up. And then the last thing that we have is silt. Find our side of the triangle for silt. It told us 10% silt, and our line is going to go diagonally down to the left now. So when we find 10% silt, we draw our line, and now we look for where those three lines intersect. Now, a way to tell if you did it wrong, if you drew your arrows in the wrong, or you drew your lines going the wrong direction, most likely your three lines will not intersect in one place. So if your lines aren't matching up somewhere, make sure that you've looked at your arrows and you drew your directions correctly. So now we have found where our lines intersect. So we look for our bold lines to find our box that we're in. So we find our bolded lines. So this whole area up here represents clay. So the soil texture of this second sample is going to be clay. And then finally, we'll look at the third one, and I will walk you through that one, and then I'll let you go on your own to finish. So the third one does not tell us a percentage of clay. They tell us a percent sand, and they tell us a percent silt, and want us to also find the texture. So if we go back to where we can draw. So for this one, they told us that we have 40% sand. Remember, they didn't tell us a clay number. So we find where sand needs to be. They told us we have 40%. So sand, my arrow says to go up diagonally towards the left. So for 40% on the sand, I'm drawing up. Sorry, my line's a little crooked there. Let me try that again. All right. And then they also told us that we have 40% silt. So silt is over here. Remember, our arrows tell us to go diagonally down towards the left. So we're going to find 40% silt. Draw our line diagonally down towards the left. And that's all they told us. So given this information, if we were to draw our line correctly on the clay side to find the percentage, we would need our line to intersect where these other two intersect. So if I start right here and work backwards, that tells us that our percent clay is 20%. So if you look back here, you could fill in 20% for our percent clay, because we worked backwards from where these other two lines intersect. We went left and we found out that it is 20%. So now where our three lines intersect, remember we're looking for our bold lines that separate the boxes, and we can tell that this soil sample is loam. So when we go back to the worksheet, we knew this was 20% clay, and we found out that the texture name was loam. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any other problems or questions, let me know. Try your best if you have a printer to print it out so that you can draw on this. It helps a lot. If not, use your finger on your screen. Try to do the best you can, but make sure that you're paying attention to what percentage you're looking at, whether it's clay, silt, or sand, and that you're paying attention to the direction of your arrows. Because if you don't pay attention to the direction of the arrows, for this one, if I was looking for percent silt and I didn't pay attention to my arrows, I could have accidentally drawn my line going this way, and then my three lines would have never intersected. So be very careful about the direction of your lines and which percentage you're putting on which side of the triangle. So finish the rest of those questions on your own. Make sure that your geology doodle notes are finished and your soil doodle notes are finished.